Welcome back everyone, let's talk about Canto 9 of Orlando Furioso today. A very long canto, in fact I have here my Italian version, I have here my English version in Barbara Reynolds translation, and they're both very long. This is the longest canto so far that we've found so far in reading Orlando Furioso. It's made out of 94 ottave. And we have to remember that Ariosto didn't set himself a particular limit. The shortest canto in Orlando Furioso has 72 ottave, and the longest one has 199. This is also a canto that has a lot of European geography in it, and I really appreciate what Barbara Reynolds did in her book and her editors, because she included in Canto 9 a simple but very beautiful map of Northern Europe and more or less all the locations and geographies that are mentioned in this crazy Canto 9. We have to remember some crucial towns that are still there today. One of them is in France, is Saint-Malo. Another one is in Belgium, that's Antwerp. And we are really moving across the territory of Holland and Belgium and Denmark in this canto. What's interesting about Canto 9 is that the stanzas between number 8 and 94, so from stanza 8 to the end of the canto, plus the stanzas in Canto 10 from 1 to 34, have been inserted. They were a new addition by Ariosto in the third edition of Orlando Furioso in 1532. So they were not present in the first edition of 1516 when Orlando Furioso first came out. So we're now following Orlando and his travels around Europe to search for Angelica. We find him in stanza number 8 in the region of the river Quesnon, which is a river that splits the region of Normandy from the region of Brittany. And this river, in fact, ends up in the Gulf of Normandy, around the town of Saint-Malo and Mont Saint-Michel. This is where Orlando sees a woman in a boat, and she calls him. She needs help for a valiant knight, that for Orlando would be, to help the King of Ireland, who is organizing a war against the island of Ebuda, which we've heard already before in the previous canto. That's the island, in fact, where Angelica is. So there is a coincidence there. And Orlando himself, while hearing this, since he's been searching all over Europe already and he's never found Angelica, he's believing that, or maybe he understands that Angelica is there, is in Ebuda. So he's convincing himself to go and help, not only because of his values, but also because he could find Angelica there. Orlando doesn't hesitate a moment. He starts and leaves for Ireland, for England, to unite his strength with the King of Ireland. However, the winds are contrary and they push him back towards Belgium again and towards Antwerp. And in Antwerp, he finds an old man. This old man is clearly a messenger for Olympia, who is in her palace. The old man asks Orlando for his help, and he is available anytime to help a woman who is in need or who is in a desperate situation. So he goes and meets with Olympia. We still don't know her name, Olympia's name. We're going to find out towards the end of the canto. But from stanza number 22 until stanza number 56, this is Olympia's monologue and her description of her story and why she is in such a desperate situation. As part of this pretty complicated story that Olympia tells Orlando, we find about new characters, in particular Bireno, who is a character invented by Ariosto. He is a duke from Zealand, this Zealand that's part of Denmark, who falls in love with Olympia, and Olympia loves him too. So they promise each other in marriage, they promise each other everlasting love. Then we have the character of Cimosco, who is the king of Frisia, and his son named Arbante. We can summarize these troubles by saying that the king of Frisia, Cimosco, attacks the kingdom of Olympia's family, kills everybody in her family, leaving only her as the only survivor. After which, for desperation, Olympia will be pretending to accept the marriage with Cimosco's son, Arbante, but the first night of their wedding, she, in accordance with two brothers who were working for her, she kills him in a very Shakespearean scene, I would say, which is described in scene 41, stanza 41. Calzò un'accetta e con sì valoroso braccio dietro al capo lo percosse, che gli levò la vita e la parola. Io saltai presta e gli segai la gola. I cut his throat. Poor Arbante is dead. Now his father, Cimosco, is furious. He goes into war with Bireno. He captures Bireno. Bireno is now his prisoner. And long story short, Olympia is asking Orlando to help her, at the very least, to help her go to the king, Cimosco, and exchange her own life for Bireno's life, because she doesn't trust Cimosco, he's a very evil character, to actually comply with the agreement. And so she needs a valiant knight with her. Orlando, after hearing all this, he does not accept this type of conclusion. He wants to not only save Olympia's situation, but help Olympia's situation, but he also wants to actually save Bireno. And that's what he sets out to do. It's a little bit maybe curious to wonder why Orlando is so ready to get himself in such a situation that could take a long time, when really he's just left recently. He left Charlemagne's army to go and pursue his own love interest, that's Angelica. But let's not ask too many questions, because if Ariosto is not asking himself too many questions, we shouldn't either. This is also the canto where Ariosto introduces us to the archibugio. It's basically the musket, or the first firearm that he talks about in the poem. And it's interesting from a historic point of view, because firearms were in fact new in the 14th century and 15th century. They were just starting to be used in battles and wars. And so let's remember, he's putting these firearms historically back in the 8th, 9th century. And we have to remember that Charlemagne never saw any firearm in his life. But this is another anachronism that Ariosto gives us. But I love how specific Ariosto is in describing this type of gun or musket, this archibugio, as it was called back then. At the end of stanza 28, Ariosto says, porta alcune arme che l'antica gente non vide mai, né forca lui la nuova. Un ferro bugio, lungo da 2 braccia. Ferro bugio, it's a piece of iron with a hole inside, dentro a cui polve ed una palla caccia, dust and a ball inside. Very simple. So this is the archibugio that King Cimosco was using to defeat all of his enemies and that's the reason why he was so powerful. However, when Orlando gets to Dordrecht, which is in the southern Holland, and he's there to challenge King Cimosco, King Cimosco and his men are even too arrogant to use this firearm, because there's so many, they're outnumbering Orlando so much, and they don't even think about using it. But very quickly they realize that Orlando is an incredible knight and fighter. In fact, there is one particular stanza that I love in Italian, which is stanza 68, where Orlando is basically skewering 6 enemies just with one single weapon, and even killing the 7th one. And so this stanza 68 goes like this. Il cavalier d'Anglante, ove più spesse, vide le genti e l'arme abbassò l'asta, ed uno in quella e poscia un altro messe, e un altro che sembrar di pasta. I love this mention of pasta. They looked like they were made of pasta, of dough, we can say. E fino a 6 ve ne infilzò e li resse, tutti in una lancia. Finally, Cimosco tries to kill Orlando using the firearm, but he fails. He only kills the horse that Orlando was using. Orlando jumps down and finally chops the king's head, therefore saving Olympia and leading to the happy ending of the story of this mini novel which is Canto 9. And we could say that it's really about this firearm, this weapon that Ariosto wants to focus our attention. And it's one of the most interesting parts of this canto in a special way, because there is a reflection in stanza 89 from Orlando's point of view. He says that in taking this firearm, his aim is not to use the deadly weapon in his own defense, for cowardly he deems it to abuse the laws which govern knights' accoutrements. Orlando, as a very valorous and virtuous knight, does not like this type of new weapon, these firearms, and we know today that this reflects Ariosto's own thinking and beliefs about this type of new weapons that were being developed for war and battle. Battle, combat and war was something completely different from what it morphed into after the invention of firearms. And it also makes us think today, what would Ariosto have said, or what would Ariosto think about the worst of them all, of this technological invention, the atomic bomb? What would he have to say about that in terms of lack of virtue of whoever thinks to use such unbelievably powerful weapons in a war, in a battle? Orlando is disgusted by this arquebugio, by this firearm, so he throws it to the bottom of the sea with a sense of returning it to the hell where it comes from. The canto concludes with a beautiful celebration of Bireno and Olympia's wedding. They decide to get married in Holland, and Ariosto is playing a little bit with us, the readers, by saying, hey, you don't want to miss it, so I need to bring you with me to Holland to assist and at least see how beautiful this wedding is. But then they're also preparing another one in Zealand that's going to be even more sumptuous. And I must ask you not to think of this second, more sumptuous wedding, for new disturbances arising there will interrupt my story for a bit. Of all these happenings, I'll give you news if my next canto you will now peruse. Thanks everyone again for listening to this brief video about Canto 9 of Orlando Furioso. We're gonna follow Orlando in his quest, in his search for Angelica. Will he find her at some point? Will he not? We will find out very soon.